Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast, wherever you are in the world. For all you high-income professionals, entrepreneurs, investors out there, I have a fantastic guest for us today, Vasu from the APTA Investment Group, and he's a surgeon, and he helps surgeons invest in predominantly real estate. We're going to talk about what it is his portfolio is offering, and I'm really happy to have him on. Vasu, welcome.
Glad to be here, Christopher.
Yeah. And briefly introduce yourself, chronicle your journey, and I'm excited to dive into the questions.
Yeah. I was a Indian kid, grew up in Kansas City, son of immigrants, tried to play baseball, found out when I couldn't make the high school team that probably was not going to be able to make a living playing baseball. So I had to leverage my strengths, which I happened to be good at school. And so I like math and science and gravitated towards medicine. Still follow baseball, but can't play professionally. Went to college and medical school in Kansas City and really enjoyed the intricacies of head and neck anatomy and wanted to do surgery. I initially thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon, but I liked ENT surgery a little bit better. I did my residency in Baltimore, and I've been in practice since 2003 in Southern Indiana. Thought once I got into practice, I thought, man, this is great. I've achieved all my lifetime goal and look forward to seeing all these happy people that were 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead of me. And quite to my surprise, I saw a bunch of unhappy mentors of mine, people who were senior to me in medicine, and they got bogged down by some of the day-to-day grind of practicing medicine and the stress, the insurance issues, running a practice, you name it, and taking call, working late hours. And so I was looking around for the happy folks because that's what I wanted. I wanted to be happy, and found that the happy folks were the ones who actually didn't need to practice medicine. They were practicing medicine because they got to instead of having to. So I was like, that's what I want as quickly as possible. And so being a very risk averse person, thinking about how do I find that with the least amount of risk, real estate became that natural tool. So back in 2004-ish, started my journey of really learning the ropes and did another residency, essentially working with people that were doing this full time for a living and really working with the best of the best to figure out their wisdom. Kind of learned all the basics myself and then worked with them on and gaining some wisdom, and then finally dove in and worked on some projects together with other people. And long story short is we solved that pain point for ourselves of not being able to practice medicine because we loved it, not because I had to. The natural human evolution is to kind of share that. We worked as we expanded our medical practice and with other surgeons in the community, created opportunities for other physicians and surgeons to join and leverage our strengths to develop other real estate opportunities. And they too got to be able to enjoy the fruits of their investments and be able to practice on their own terms. And so then just naturally became an evolution. It's like, okay, we'll solve the pain point for ourselves and solve pain point for people around you. And maybe this is something that could really benefit our greater community. And what we've noticed is that as we help more and more surgeons get to practice instead of having to practice, it brings the humanity back into medicine. So our goal is to help reverse this negative secular trends in medicine and get to practice if you want to, or truly if you don't like it, let's get you out of medicine and go do something else that you like. And solid, safe real estate investments just happens to be that vehicle.
Yeah, what a fantastic introduction. And we'll talk about APTA and what distinguishes APTA from other investment groups and investment firms. What is your USP?
I think our unique proposition, selling proposition, is a very technical term. I can tell you're an entrepreneur, Christopher. We were born out of solving problems. So we didn't get into this business to become a real estate private equity firm. It was more like, okay, how can we solve problems for ourselves? There's a problem we had ourselves, our family. And then once we helped solve that problem for ourselves, it's like, okay, how do we beta test this with people around you? And then APTA Investment Group really became a calling after solving pain points for ourselves and the people around us. So our depth, our experience, we've been doing this for over 20 years. Trust is very central to us. So APTA is a Sanskrit word for trust, which is very near and dear. We kind of hold that very dear to the heart. And our track record, essentially, we've never lost money on a deal over multiple economic cycles, including 7 and 8 and European debt crisis, the pandemic, money printing, tariffs, etc. You name all of these different various economic cycles. We've had fluctuations, but we've never lost money. Our worst deal did 9.5%. And so never having capital call. And we invest in our own money. So we're typically the largest investors in all of our deals. I think those are some of the unique things that make APTA stand out.
Yeah, interesting. And the other question I have for you is, what is your investment strategy? Is it apartments? Is it commercial? What areas that you invest in? Talk about your strategy.
We've invested in all different kinds of asset classes in the past, but our focus now is narrowed into three specific asset classes. One is multifamily, specifically in areas that are high growth markets, like the one you're in Austin. We've got a deal in Austin, various Texas markets, which are obviously very popular for a reason. Atlanta, Georgia, North Carolina, those states. And then in the Midwest, we do have one apartment deal in the Midwest as well, but majority of our stuff in the Midwest is where I live in Louisville, Kentucky, southern Indiana, is medical office buildings and retail centers. So think of Main and Main housing e-commerce resistant tenants, the dentist, the chiropractor, local restaurant, nail salon, those type of businesses that may have fluctuations, but less sensitivity to the economy than others.
Yeah, interesting. A follow-up question I have for you is, how do you, in terms of risk management, because especially for surgeons or doctors in general, risk management. So how do you navigate this climate of high interest rates, and you get inflation, tariffs, even people getting priced out of real estate, climate change? How do you view all of these risks, and how do you incorporate that into your strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question, Christopher. I think there are a ton of risks out there. And so I think it's really about following a process and being systematic in how you approach risk. So I'll give you an example. So before we ever look at a deal, one of the things I suggest anybody who's involved in real estate to think about is, what are the factors that you can't change? You can't typically change the location. So and then when you drill down to the location, you look at the entire metropolitan statistical area and think about what are the drivers of the economy in that area? What's the population growth look like? And we break down even population growth into various areas, because sometimes population just grows because of more people being born than dying, but also there are more sensitive indicators of population growth, like domestic net migration. So where are people within the country moving? A net zero number. So if somebody leaves, I won't pick on a city, but let's just say somebody in the Rust Belt leaves the Rust Belt and moves to Austin, it's a +1 for Austin and a -1 from wherever they're coming from. So we're really drilling down into things that we can't change, right? So put a lot of due diligence in things that we can't change, and then bring that down to the sub-market and look at where specifically this asset is located. How is it close to jobs? Is it close to entertainment? Are the household incomes in that area supportive of the type of businesses or the asset that you're holding? And then we look at the deals, and then we stress test each of the different assumptions of the deal and figure out what happens if interest rates rise, what happens if there are black swan events that you can't ever predict. But you go down from A through F, you can't predict G through Z, but maybe if you get yourself right on A through F, you're probably going to survive. And then wrapping a business model around it that is not overly levered and has staggered debt maturities, et cetera. We don't need to get in all the technical terms, but the overarching theme is there's a systematic way to reduce risk, and you start with stuff that you can't change, and then you figure out what are the stuff that you do have an influence on as you systematically reduce risk.
Yeah. One of the great things about great investment teams and firms is the operators. And so you've assembled your team is quite skilled. So talk about how you approach assembling your team and how it differentiates and distinguishes from other firms.
Yeah, this is just really another good question, Christopher, because I just thought about this because I was asked recently, what would you tell your younger self that you know now that you didn't know back then? And it's the exact same topic. I used to think we're surgeons, we're like trained to think we are invincible, right? We are control of everything that goes on. In the real world in business, outside of the operating room, you need a whole team. Even in the operating room, you need a team. If you think about it, you need a whole team of people to help you perform whatever surgery you're doing. But the team is really super important. So there are domain experts in each of the different areas, finding the deals, so networking with brokers and owners, putting the deals together, raising the capital, the lending, and then asset management, ongoing property management, and then disposition. So there are really unique skill sets that are important for the full life cycle of a real estate deal. And so I think it's really helpful to have a good internal team, and then you need accounting and legal and all kinds of compliance, et cetera. So finding really domain experts in each of the different facets of the entire real estate cycle is super helpful, so that you can, again, going back to the risk issue, how can you mitigate risk and let the upside take care of itself? And I think that's one of the key mottos that I've learned from studying the most successful investors in the world.
Yeah. A follow-up question I have for you is talk about, because a lot of the audience and listeners, viewers are doctors, and they love to hear numbers and case studies. So talk about your portfolio and your previous as well as current offerings and case studies and success stories.
Yeah, I'll share with you one story of a exit and across a surgical hospital. So we noticed in 2000, middle of the first decade of the century, around 2005, 6-ish, that there was a small window of opportunity where surgeons could get together and form and build a hospital. We developed a surgical hospital in southern Indiana and got 23 original surgeons together. And there was a moratorium, and then we went and found that opportunity and built a facility. So we created two different entities. So one is an operating entity for the business itself, running the hospital, and then one for the real estate. So the real estate, we obviated some of the biggest risks of any kind of real estate deal, is the quality of your tenant. So our thought process is, why not bet on ourselves? And initially there was a lot of resistance because people were like, that's a lot of risk. We're going to have to sign, we have to be guarantors on this note. And what happens if this place goes under? And there was a lot of fear, I should say. But at the end of the day, we mitigated some of that fear. Was, okay, there's always going to be a need for healthcare, and we're somewhat supply constrained. You can't really make surgeons, whenever you want. And I don't know that we'll ever be able to just import surgeons from and come practice in the United States without going through the training and registration, et cetera. So we felt like from a demand side, demand for our services was always going to be there. And then from a supply side, there was supply constraints. Granted, there was a lot of changes in with big health systems becoming more prominent and perhaps taking you over. But at the end of the day, a good quality medical facility that was patient-centric and provided really good care, we thought would be an opportunity that is not likely to change. That helped us push us over the edge and develop this surgical hospital. And so we're able to wrap some really good debt around this, because you think about it from a lender's perspective, they're trying to mitigate risk. They had 23 surgeons sign on to a note that they're operating in on a facility that they're operating in was pretty low risk. You had a bunch of creditworthy clients, and they had favorable tailwinds in terms of the business that they were operating. So we were able to get favorable debt and put in our own equity. And we just sold the property about a couple of years ago. So it was after 15, 16 years, we got a 28x return.
Wow.
On our money. It calculated out to a 20, 24, 25% IRR. It was a really good investment. It was really safe because we were betting on ourselves. It was not just a great investment, but it was really low risk investment that did really well.
Yeah, I love that. So we have around 5-7 minutes remaining. And for the listeners and viewers, if they wanted to learn more about APTA, I know you have a lot of free resources, and how can they connect with you and learn from you and get more information to see if it's a good fit?
Yeah, so we provide a lot of resources on helping people get started throughout their own journey, whether they're at their very beginning of their career or a middle part of their career, or they're planning for retirement, or they just want to slow down. So at aptainvest.com/learn, and there's a ton of educational resources available no matter where you're at in your journey.
Yeah. And then what for the audience also, because you cater to surgeons, but if there are non-surgical physicians, where do they fit into your offerings?
Yeah, a lot of our investors are surgeons, but not all of our investors. And in fact, probably 20, 30% of our investors are not even physicians at all. So other real estate folks who just like the surgical precision that we approach. The same methodical approach we use in surgery is what we use for our investing. And so that resonates with a lot of other professionals. So we're open to people who subscribe to that kind of philosophy.
Yeah, your story is very amazing. And for those that are inspired, they either they don't want to practice medicine or they want to do something different. What are your words of inspiration or people that inspired you, courses, books, podcasts, conferences, and how can they reach you?
Yeah, I think it just really begins with a vision, right? And we as surgeons have gone through a lot of training and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And you start practicing, you think you reach this pinnacle. And what I realized is that like you've got to constantly be growing, otherwise you're dying. So no matter how much you've achieved, you certainly enjoy the fruits of your blood, sweat, and tears and all the work that you put into whatever career that you're in. But if you're not growing, you're really dying. And I would say figure out what you really love to do, figure out your why. And sometimes you've got to ask yourself 4, 5, 6 times to get to that, peel various layers of that onion down to its core to figure out what your why is, and then find a path that is concordant with that, and find people along the way that on your podcast, you get inspiration from all kinds of guests that I'm sure that you have, and learn the basics, and then find some mentors along the way, and you climb the mountain one step at a time. It's totally within the reach of anybody who can go through medical school, residency, and then practice can certainly have a whole lot of other. I think we're actually well suited to be entrepreneurial in our mindset given our training.
Yeah, no, I know like I said, investing is not rocket science. And if you went through med school and all this training, you're more than well equipped to deal with this areas and succeed. Really fascinating. And for the audience, thanks so much for coming on, and all of your resources will be in the show notes. And again, thanks so much and for coming on and sponsoring the podcast.